Hello and welcome to this edition of Face Off here on France 24. The 62nd United Nations General Assembly gets underway this Monday at the organisation's headquarters in New York. It's a rare chance for the leaders of the 192 member states to gather together under the same roof with plenty of time to talk. But is talking all they do? The topics on the table for this session could be read as a rather depressing list of international relations failures: Darfur, Iraq, Afghanistan and Kosovo. And then there's the global failure of climate change, the topic that kicks off the gathering today. The Assembly's guiding principle is one state, one vote. Everyone must have an equal say. But the search for consensus among so many competing voices can often mean resolutions passed by the Assembly end up reflecting what Kofi Annan called the lowest common denominator of widely different opinions. In other words, perhaps the unwieldy, well-meaning United Nations just doesn't have enough muscle. Joining me here in the studio are two journalists from leading French dailies, Christophe, Middle East expert at Libération newspaper. Welcome to you. And Pierre, Rousselin, the head of the international desk at Le Figaro. Thank you both very much for coming along. Christophe, let's start with you. 154 leaders and officials have signed up to speak over the next 9 days. Is the General Assembly just hot air?
It's not a place where you discuss real issues, at least in public. It's a place where people show themselves and try to make an impression on the general public, on the other presidents, on the other head of states. It's a question of style. Of course, you have lots of talk behind the doors, but it's an ongoing process. It's as I was saying, it's more kind of a show than a real place where you decide anything. So the UN could run without the General Assembly every year, but it gives the mood of the year or of the coming year, because then the agenda will be set for the next coming months.
But the thing is, I mean, the General Assembly is such a heavyweight beast that its agenda has to be planned up to 7 months in advance. Now, doesn't that mean, Pierre Rousselin, that the UN just can't react quickly enough to emerging situations?
Well, of course. I mean, that's the major criticism one can make to the UN, but I believe, as Christophe said, that this gathering is a lot of show, but it's very useful because you have all these people meeting, and new faces coming into the international arena, and people getting to know each other. It's not going to change the face of the world, but it's going to enable them to have a working relationship, and it is important. Now, there are some issues. Of course, climate is an issue, and I think it's a good thing that the UN takes hold of this issue. There's another meeting taking place under George Bush's auspices, and I think those two meetings can be useful.
But what kind of signal does it give if George W. Bush is not even going to speak at this assembly this time round, and he's holding his parallel meeting on climate change in Washington the very same day as the UN is trying to tackle that condition? Isn't that just undermining what the UN's trying to do?
Well, I'm not sure it's undermining, but it shows that the UN is not the beginning and the end of everything, and I think that's pretty normal. And it's the case on climate change, and it's also the cases on other issues like the major issue we're tackling, which is Iran. Not everything can come from the UN, and this is something that I think is significant this year and is going to come out of this General Assembly. People are going to. I think what's interesting is how useful the UN can be and how limited it can be, but it is useful.
I'm rather pessimistic because the UN is in a very long transition since the war in Iraq, and even before, because the Clinton administration already undermined the UN role in the 90s, in the late 90s. There are talks about reshuffling of the UN, and nothing is coming out. So we are still abiding by rules which were written in 45 or 48, but it does not fit to the world of today, and even the biggest player does not care anymore about the UN, but nobody, and even the states, is taking the conclusion that the UN should be totally reshuffled. There's a lot of talk about the change of the Security Council, but it can take another 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Nobody knows.
I mean, Kofi Annan, of course, launched that appeal for reform, that urgent appeal for reform, 2 years ago, and we haven't got very far, have we?
No. So the General Assembly is very much linked to the idea that one country, one vote, but the resolutions taken by the General Assembly are usually the weakest ones, especially towards the Middle East problems, which are the hottest ones today on the map.
So can we believe Tony Blair then when he sort of addresses the quartet earlier today and says, at last there's movement? I mean, is that just trying to sort of do, as you say, a bit of public relations, a bit of show? Yeah,
I'm sure there needs a lot more movement on the Middle East for it to start to move. I mean, it's good that Tony Blair is optimistic, but I agree with what Christophe said. But what I'm trying to say is that one shouldn't consider the UN as the beginning and the end of everything in foreign affairs and in diplomacy. And I think in the past it has been a little, we have had that tendency which showed its limits on Iraq, before the months coming to the war in Iraq, everybody was saying, it has to go through the UN, has to go through the UN. It couldn't go through the UN, and the war still happened. So I think today one has to have a different view, more relativistic, and saying, well, this is what the UN can be useful for, and this does not, and we can do things through other channels.
But of course, I mean, the UN is still the only global forum for discussing global conflict in a global context, so we should cherish it for that.
Absolutely.
However, I mean, we've touched on this issue of one member, one vote, and 2/3 of the UN's General Assembly members are developing countries, so that gives them an automatic majority in the UN. Why haven't we made more progress addressing their concerns then, if they have got this weight that they don't have anywhere else?
Well, they have a weight in the UN, but their power is gradually becoming stronger and stronger, but has not reached equality. And this is something that is changing. I mean, India, China are emergent powers, and their strength is going to be felt more and more inside the UN and outside the UN.
They are very divided even. I mean, if you look into Africa, who would you choose to represent Africa? I would say this is something between Nigeria and South Africa, but Egypt still wants to represent Africa or the Middle East. So you have many places where the emerging countries are quite divided and they don't agree on different issues. The thing is that the UN could be more, work more with very specific bodies, regional bodies, but
or perhaps
also
when it's broken down to its smaller components, such as the
yes,
WHO or UNICEF.
It could also much more work with bodies dedicated to an issue. You have also this problem of being a nuclear power and sitting or not in the Security Council. So it seems for a long period, and it's very accurate since the Iraq war, the UN is a non-functioning body which nobody has the courage to repair because nobody knows what to do with that. And it seems that even the Bush administration would like to get rid of it. But the Bush administration is at its end, so what will the next American administration try or will do with the UN? Nobody knows until now.
Can you offer, either of you, any UN success stories in recent years? Has there been anything where we've seen the UN really achieving the best it can achieve?
Liberia, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Small country.
We'll see in Darfur if it works out. I mean, it's
taken a long time.
It's taken a long time coming, and we're going to have probably this UN African Union force being deployed. I think this is the major challenge that Mr. Ban Ki-moon has in front of him, and to show that the UN has a role in crisis conflicts like Darfur and regional conflicts. Yeah.
What about Iran, though? I mean, there's always a UN baddie, it seems to me. Last year it was Venezuela's fiery president Hugo Chavez. This year it's shaping up to be Mohammed Ahmadinejad. It's his turn to be controversial. Why does this happen, and is that helpful? I mean...
I know.
It's the show part.
Yes, it's part of a show. He will give the tone and he will try to make impression on his colleagues and on the world public opinion. So of course, I would be Ahmadinejad. I would say it's the occasion to speak to such a body. Speaking about the failures and or the successes of the UN, I would quote Liberia, because it was a peacekeeping and then a peace building success. It's still going on and it's still not ended. I'm much more cautious about Darfur. I think the Darfur is still ahead. I don't know, and I'm rather pessimistic about the ability of the UN and the AU to cool down the situation in Darfur, which is now very antagonized and cut into many pieces.
So you're both suggesting that, unwieldy though it is, we're glad to have the UN still. It can still act. If we didn't have it, we'd be in much more trouble. That seems to be the sort of consensus emerging here. I found an interesting thing. In December 1948, there was a UN General Assembly just up the road here in Paris at the Palais de Chaillot, and they signed during that General Assembly the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Are the days over now that we could ever achieve anything so significant during an assembly like this?
Yes, probably. I mean, these are very declarative, and it makes people feel good. I'm not sure it's that useful. I mean.
So again, there's the show element. They were doing the show even then.
Yes, I think it's more important, to get the UN to get things done, which is very difficult. It's more difficult than to have a nice declaration where everybody can agree. I don't think that's very significant.
At least it sets an agenda. For the climate, for example, you can be sure it will be like the Millennium.
The Millennium Development Goals.
Goals. It will not be achieved, but at least at the end of the process, people will say it has not been achieved and it's not normal. So you set an agenda, and people violated it. They respect it, but then they cannot do as if it does not exist, which is the case for the Human Rights Universal Declaration. You can violate it every day, but you know that it exists and you signed it.
A bit like the UN itself. It's comforting that it's there, and sometimes it doesn't work so well, but there is outrage, of course, if it's violated completely, if it's not there, if we don't respect the idea that it exists. Well, thank you both very much indeed, Christophe Ayad and Pierre Rousselin. Thank you both very much indeed for joining me. And for those of you watching at home, write into our website and tell us what you think the UN is useful for today. That's www.France24.com. I'll be back with another face-off debate, same time tomorrow here on France 24. Stay with us. Thank you, Joe.